The Witch and the Definitely Dead Detective by Sadie Brent. Chapter 5. The House on the River. The Challenger rumbled into town, its low growl bouncing off the buildings that lined Main Street. Evie sat rigid in the passenger seat, her fingers gripping Spinks's carrier. The cat, for his part, seemed unimpressed, having finally settled into resigned silence after the long journey. The heart of Stony Fork was even more picturesque than it had appeared from the hilltop. The streets were wide but quiet, lined with brick storefronts painted in cheerful colors: sunflower yellow, robin's egg blue, sage green. Hanging baskets overflowing with petunias swung gently from lampposts, and hand-painted wooden signs advertised businesses like Topo the Muffin and Beans and Books. "This here's Main Street," Frida said, waving a hand toward the stretch of shops. "If you need anything, this is the place to start. We've got a little of everything. Tony's Bakery over there is a must, by the way. Best muffins you'll ever taste. And that's Hugo's bookstore just next to it. He's a character, but he knows his books." Evie nodded, trying to take it all in. It felt surreal, like stepping into the pages of a storybook. Everything about the town seemed quaint, but not in a contrived way. It was as though Stony Fork had existed for decades, untouched by the frantic pace of modern life. Frida turned down a side street, the car's tires crunching on gravel. "Now, over here's where you'll find some of the town offices. And oh, there's Joe Stone, our sheriff." Evie glanced out the window to see a broad-shouldered man in his 40s tipping his hat to a woman walking her dog. His uniform was neatly pressed, and his face was framed by a strong jawline and a warm, easygoing smile. He raised a hand in greeting as Frida drove past. "Joe's good people," Frida said. "If you ever need anything, he's your guy. Knows just about everyone in town." As they wound through the streets, Evie's unease began to ease. There was a strange, almost magnetic pull to the town, a quiet charm that made her want to explore every nook and cranny. "Here we are," Frida announced as they turned onto a dirt road shaded by towering maple trees on the outskirts of town. Evie leaned forward in her seat, her pulse quickening as the house came into view. The first thing Evie noticed was the color. A soft lavender that glowed faintly in the golden afternoon light. The house was 2 stories tall with a wraparound porch adorned with hanging plants and wind chimes that tinkled softly in the breeze. The windows were large, framed by deep purple shutters, and a weathered wooden swing swayed gently at one end of the porch. "Welcome home," Frida said, pulling to a stop in the gravel driveway. Evie swallowed hard, her eyes scanning every detail of the house. It was beautiful, no doubt about that. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The air here felt different, heavy, but not oppressive, almost like the house was watching her, waiting to see what she'd do. Frida stepped out of the car, motioning for Evie to follow. "Come on, let me show you around." Spinks meowed plaintively as Evie lifted his carrier, muttering, "I know, buddy, this is weird for me too." The porch steps creaked under her weight, their weathered wood worn smooth by years of use. Frida produced a key from her pocket, slipping it into the ornate brass lock. The door swung open with a soft groan, revealing a cozy interior bathed in warm amber light. "Lizzie had good taste," Frida said, stepping inside. The living room was a perfect blend of vintage charm and bohemian flair. A deep purple velvet sofa sat beneath a large bay window, surrounded by mismatched armchairs upholstered in floral prints. The walls were lined with shelves overflowing with books, crystals, and potted plants, while a Persian rug covered the hardwood floor. A fireplace with a carved stone mantel dominated one wall, its hearth filled with neatly stacked firewood. Evie stepped inside hesitantly, her eyes darting around. The house smelled of lavender and rosemary, with a faint undertone of beeswax and aged wood. It felt alive, in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. "She kept it just like this," Frida said, running her fingers over the edge of a shelf. "Never one to shy away from color, that's for sure." Evie nodded, taking it all in. It was so different from the sterile, minimalist apartments she'd lived in over the years. This place had personality, layers of it, like every object held a story waiting to be told. "Come on, let me show you the kitchen." The kitchen was just as inviting, with butter-yellow cabinets and a farmhouse sink that looked like it had seen decades of use. Copper pots hung from a rack above the island, and the countertops were cluttered with jars of spices, dried herbs, and antique tins. A small breakfast nook overlooked the backyard, where a garden teemed with vibrant flowers and vegetables. Evie stepped to the window, her breath catching at the sight. Beyond the garden, a narrow path led down to the river, its waters glinting like liquid gold in the fading light. She loved that garden, Frida said, following her gaze. Spent more time out there than inside, I reckon. Grew everything herself. Herbs, vegetables, even a few exotic plants she brought back from her travels. If you ever need a lesson in gardening, just ask Tony over at the bakery. He helped her with the tougher stuff. Evie's stomach tightened as she stared out at the garden. She could almost see Lizzie out there. Her hands dirty from planting, her face lit up with joy. This is a lot, Evie admitted, turning back to Frida. Frida gave her a sympathetic smile. I know it's overwhelming, Han, but take your time. You'll grow into it just like she did. They continued the tour, moving upstairs to the bedrooms. Lizzie's room was the largest. Its walls painted a soft green that reminded Evie of springtime. The bed was covered in a patchwork quilt, and the nightstand held a stack of well-worn books and a small, ornate lamp. Evie ran her fingers over the edge of the quilt, feeling a pang of emotion she couldn't quite name. She always said this house was her sanctuary, Frida said softly, a place where she could be herself no matter what the world outside thought. Evie nodded, her throat tight. After touring the house, Frida led her outside to the garden. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly turned soil, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rows of plants. Evie kneeled beside a patch of lavender, running her fingers over the fragrant stalks. She felt a strange sense of connection, like the garden was welcoming her in its own way. Beyond the garden, the river called to her. She wandered down the path, the sound of the water growing louder with each step. When she reached the dock, she stopped, staring out at the rippling surface. This might just be it, her new home.